This is the story of how one family turned $150 and a wheelbarrow into America's third largest beer empire, then wrecked it all in under 20 years. 5 generations of Strohs built the Stroh Brewing Company, a brewing dynasty out of Detroit that Forbes valued at $700 million at its peak. If you had dropped that fortune into the S&P 500 index and left it alone, today it would have grown to roughly $9 billion. The Strohs chose the opposite path. They borrowed 5 times their own value, a catastrophic 5-to-1 debt-to-equity ratio, chasing growth through leveraged buyouts, waved off a billion-dollar acquisition offer, and watched debt swallow everything their ancestors had stacked up over a century and a half. Every last dollar in the family trust fund had dried up by 2008. This is where the first critical mistake happened, and why this became a Harvard Business School case study on how dynasties collapse. It all started with almost nothing. Beer ran through the Stroh bloodline going back to 1775, when Johann Peter Stroh first brewed at the family inn in Köln, a small town in Germany's Rhineland-Palatinate region. 3 generations later, during the German Revolution of 1848, a descendant named Bernhard Stroh packed up the family recipe and left for America. Born in 1821, he arrived in Detroit around 1850, carrying that recipe and roughly $150, then set up what might be the humblest start in American brewing history, a basement operation where he cooked Bohemian-style Pilsner and hauled it through Detroit's German neighborhoods in a wheelbarrow. Growth came quickly. By 1865, Bernhard had expanded enough to stamp the lion crest from Kjærberg Castle in ancestral Kjørn onto his bottles and rename the whole operation the Lion's Head Brewery. His death on June 24, 1882, handed control to his son, Bernhard Jr., who rebranded as B. Stroh Brewing Company and began shipping beer to Florida and Massachusetts using pasteurization and refrigerated railcars. Plant expansions by 1890 made Stroh's Beer the largest brewery in Michigan. Their Pilsner earned a blue ribbon at the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago, and by 1900, production hit 300,000 barrels a year. That's when one European trip changed the brand forever. Around 1908, Julius Stroh returned from touring famous breweries across the continent and brought back the fire brewing method. Every other American brewer heated their kettles with steam, but fire brewing applied a direct gas flame to copper kettles full of beer, and those higher temperatures caramelized the malt sugars just enough to create what the company claimed was a finer, deeper flavor. Nobody else in the country brewed this way. Strohs owned that distinction for most of the 20th century, and it became the sharpest weapon in their marketing arsenal. Julius also navigated Prohibition with a move that bordered on brilliant. He rechristened the business the Stroh Products Company and pivoted to near beer, birch beer, soft drinks, malt syrups, ice, and ice cream under the Alaska brand. Here is the detail that mattered. Stroh held Detroit's only license to produce near beer, which required brewing real beer first, then stripping the alcohol. When Prohibition ended in 1933, Stroh already had full-strength product ready to package, while every competitor scrambled to restart from nothing. That head start could not be bought at any price. Control of the company passed to Gary, the son of Julius, after Julius died in 1939, and then to John Stroh Sr. in 1950. Momentum followed. Under John, production jumped from 500,000 barrels to 2.7 million barrels by 1956. That momentum stalled in 1958 when the Michigan Beer Workers' strike shut down every brewery in the state, and national brands like Anheuser-Busch and Miller Brewing Company rushed in to grab shelf space across Stroh's home turf. Once those national players claimed that real estate, Stroh's beer never fully won it back. 1968 brought a new leader. Peter Stroh took the presidency as the fourth generation to run the company, a Princeton man from the class of 1951 with a degree in international affairs, who had originally aimed for a career at the CIA. A runaway truck crushed him against a building in Washington, D.C. in 1952, putting him in the hospital for an entire year and ending those intelligence ambitions for good. He poured everything into the family business instead, and early results backed him up. National ad agencies, outside managers recruited from Procter & Gamble and PepsiCo, and aggressive new campaigns lifted Stroh's from 15th place nationally in 1970 to 8th by 1973 across 17 states, with production reaching 6.4 million barrels a year by 1978. None of it satisfied Peter. At a family gathering, he laid down what amounted to the Dynasty's death sentence. We have to grow or go. We'll borrow the money. Here is where the second critical mistake happened. The first target was F&M Schaefer Brewing Company in 1981, a struggling New York brewer drowning under $100 million of debt. That deal delivered valuable northeastern distribution and a highly efficient plant in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and it bumped Stroh to 7th nationally. What came next dwarfed it completely. Early 1982 brought Peter's bid for Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company, the nation's fourth largest producer, and a deal the Wall Street Journal labeled a minnow swallowing a whale. Schlitz, once the pride of Milwaukee's brewing heritage, had cratered from 24 million barrels in 1976 to 14.3 million by 1981, gutted by quality control scandals and botched recipe changes. April 15, 1982, sealed the merger at $17 per share, roughly $500 million total. One number told you everything about the danger. Stroh's book value sat at about $100 million, meaning the company loaded on approximately 5 times its own worth in debt to close this leveraged buyout. America's third largest brewer emerged overnight, 7 plants deep, producing approximately 24 million barrels a year and controlling roughly 13% of the U.S. beer market. Revenue peaked around $1.65 billion across about 6,800 employees. 7 fourth-generation family members each collected $400,000 a year in dividends, living behind the gates of Grosse Pointe Farms with maids, cooks, country club memberships, and boarding school tuition. All of it rested on borrowed money that the business couldn't support. Benjamin Steinman of Beer Marketers Insights, the industry's authoritative trade publication, noted that Stroh carried about double a reasonable debt load and the marketing budget still fell short. Of what August Busch III at Anheuser-Busch and Miller spent dominating national television. Greg Stroh, a fifth-generation family member, told Forbes exactly how it felt. We made the decision to go national without having the budget. It was like going to a gunfight with a knife. We didn't have a chance. What turns this from a business mistake into an outright tragedy is the line of exits the family walked straight past. Here's where the third critical mistake happened. Sometime in the mid-1980s, Australian financier Alan Bond, who would later become infamous for his own corporate collapses, placed $1 billion on the table for the entire Stroh Brewing Company. Peter turned it down flat, unable to picture life beyond the brewery, and determined that his sons would work there. His niece Frances Stroh looked back on that moment years later with undisguised bitterness. We did have an amazing opportunity to get out of the business at the perfect time. Coors Brewing Company stepped up next with roughly $425 million, announcing a deal on September 25, 1989. Due diligence killed it, and Coors walked away, leaving Stroh gutted with no buyer and no plan. For context, today Coors operates as part of Molson Coors, with a market capitalization exceeding $12 billion, while the surviving Yuengling Brewing Company, America's oldest brewery, maintains its independence and generates over $500 million in annual revenue. On top of losing both offers, the 135-year-old Detroit brewery, the emotional center of the entire operation, had already been marked for closure on February 8, 1985, eliminating 1,159 jobs. Wrecking crews brought it down in 2 stages during April and July of 1986. Keeping that aging facility running as long as they did cost roughly $100 million in accumulated losses, according to industry observers. With the Coors deal dead, Peter Stroh hired advertising executive Hal Riney to push the brand up market. Riney ripped away the familiar script logo, swapped in block print, raised prices, and killed the popular 15 and 30 packs that working-class drinkers relied on. What followed earned the label of the steepest decline in American brewing history. Market share cratered from around 12% to roughly 6% by 1990, dropping Stroh to 4th place behind the very company that had just refused to buy them. This happened just as the craft beer revolution and microbrewery movement began reshaping American tastes, a trend the debt-laden Stroh's beer couldn't capitalize on. Instead of retreating, the company lunged forward again. Here's where the final critical mistake happened. In 1996, under new CEO William Henry, the first non-family leader after Peter stepped aside, Stroh swallowed the already bankrupt Heileman Brewing Company for approximately $290 million. Heileman added over 30 brands including Colt 45, Old Style, Rainier, and Lone Star, along with a fresh mountain of obligations. One industry analyst captured the absurdity in a single line: "Two sick chickens, they were both declining." Total debt after Heileman climbed to approximately $700 million. September 1998 delivered the final blow. Stroh's beer lost its contract to brew Pabst brands after Pabst Brewing Company shifted production to Miller Brewing Company, stranding the company with millions of barrels of unused capacity. Industry observers called it certain death, and nobody argued. February 8, 1999 brought the announcement from fifth-generation leader John Stroh III. All operations sold to Pabst Brewing Company and Miller Brewing Company for an estimated $350 million. His words carried the weight of 5 generations behind them. Emotionally, it was an extremely difficult one to make, knowing that it would impact our loyal employees, and recognizing that it would mean the end of our family's centuries-old brewing tradition that had become, in essence, an important part of our identity. Formal dissolution followed in 2000. Where that $350 million landed tells you how deep the wreckage ran. Roughly $250 million flowed straight to creditors, another $100 million covered employee pension obligations, and whatever remained trickled into a family fund. Francis Stroh noted the family plowed those last proceeds into equities right before the dot-com crash, only to take an instant nosedive with the dot bomb, as she described it. By 2008, every cent had evaporated. Francis's father, Eric Stroh, reportedly boiled it down to one sentence: "We should be a Harvard textbook case study on how not to run a business." One question shadows the whole thing. Did the family actually destroy this dynasty, or did the market do it for them? That deserves honest consideration. The 1980s and 1990s wiped out dozens of regional brewers. Olympia, Hamm's, Heileman, National, all gone. Anheuser-Busch and Miller locked up network television advertising and shut mid-tier players out entirely. Forbes journalist Carrie Dolan framed the math cleanly. There were 4 big breweries in the industry, but there really was only enough room in the market for 3. Other family-owned regional brewers found a way through, though. Yuengling Brewing survives as America's oldest brewery and a major independent player generating over $500 million in annual revenue. The Coors family went national through strategic partnerships and kept their fortune intact, eventually merging to form what's now worth over $12 billion. What separated the Strohs from those survivors came down to governance. Francis Stroh delivered the clearest autopsy. It was a family-run board. There were outside board members, but they were really there just to sort of rubber stamp what the family board members wanted. We didn't have a system of checks and balances that a publicly traded company has. And ultimately, there was one guy making the decision. Brain cancer killed Peter Stroh on September 17, 2002, at age 74. Eric, his brother, battled alcoholism after walking away from the company and died alone in 2009. Across the fifth generation, the family scattered. Greg Stroh co-founded Izzy Soda, which PepsiCo later acquired. Frances published Beer Money, a memoir of privilege and loss in 2016, and reinvented herself as a generational wealth coach. Even as recently as 2024, the fighting continued, with Whitney Stroh suing his sister and their 91-year-old mother over a $100 million family trust. Pabst Brewing Company still owns the Stroh's beer name and sells it as a budget beer today. In 2016, Pabst teamed with Brew Detroit to revive Stroh's Bohemian-style Pilsner from the original 1850s recipe, brewed in Detroit for the first time in over 30 years. Brewery Park, a corporate campus housing Crane Communications, now sits on the ground where the old plant once stood. In 2022, John Stroh III donated thousands of historical artifacts to the Detroit Historical Society for their Detroit's Brewing Heritage exhibition. Carrie Dolan, the Forbes journalist behind the defining account of this collapse, put a fine point on the whole thing. It took the Stroh family over a century to build the largest private beer fortune in America, and it took just a few bad decisions to lose the entire thing. $700 million in 1988, parked in an index fund and never touched, grows to $9 billion today. The Strohs chose the opposite of standing still, and the beer money vanished completely. Nothing passed to the next generation from a dynasty that started with a wheelbarrow and $150 in Detroit in 1850. 5 generations to build it, 2 decades to destroy it. That's the Stroh's beer story.